Welcome to the Healing Tree Podcast,
a journey in discovering God's healing ministry for us.
Simplifying the story of the Bible and the mission of Jesus through the lens of a tree.
And an invitation to experience the transformation that takes place when we're connected with our Creator. Hi, my name is Lauren.
Hi, I'm Audra, and today we're going to be talking about fish. Yeah, I said it, fish. So we're going to see what that means today.
Yes. And so last time we were continuing on with our meal series and kind of going into the second part of the water, which is part of the meal that Jesus invites us to. And we were talking about how not only does water have a role of doing cleansing or washing for us, but it also represents the work of the Holy Spirit and how he gives us new life. And so like Audra said, we're going to be talking about fish today. So let's go ahead and dive in. So we are going to go ahead and recap, going back to our anchor text in Ezekiel 47. So I'm going to read verses 1 to 5. In my vision, the man brought me back to the entrance of the temple. There I saw a stream flowing east from beneath the door of the temple and passing to the right of the altar on its south side. Measuring as he went, he took me along the stream for 1,750 feet and then led me across. The water was up to my ankles. He measured off another 1,750 feet and led me across again. This time the water was up to my knees. After another 1,750 feet, it was up to my waist. Then he measured another 1,750 feet, and the river was too deep to walk across. It was deep enough to swim in, but too deep to walk through.
He asked me, "Have you been watching, Son of Man?" Then he led me back along the riverbank. When I returned, I was surprised by the sight of many trees growing on both sides of the river. Then he said to me, "This river flows east through the desert into the valley of the Dead Sea. The waters of this stream will make the salty waters of the Dead Sea fresh and pure.
There will be swarms of living things wherever the water of this river flows. Fish will abound in the Dead Sea, for its waters will become fresh. Life will flourish wherever this water flows. Fishermen will stand along the shores of the Dead Sea, all the way from En Gedi to En Eglaim. The shores will be covered with nets drying in the sun. Fish of every kind will fill the Dead Sea, just as they fill the Mediterranean."
Seems like there's a lot of emphasis on fish in that last part that we just read. Somehow, I guess just to recap again, this story in Ezekiel, we have this temple, and from this temple, river is flowing from it, and it seems like everything the river touches, it becomes healed, or it becomes filled with life. And so now we have this Dead Sea that was literally dead before, and now with this new water, fish are now, it says, fish will abound in the Dead Sea and life will flourish. And then now we have fishermen that are on the shores of this Dead Sea, and it says that the shores will be covered with nets drying in the sun, and then fish of every kind will be filling this water. What do you think that means? Like, what is that? Why do you think there's an emphasis on fish here?
Yeah, when I read this, I think about, I guess, just fish representing one of the many living things that are in this water, kind of like us. We've talked about this before, but sometimes in our lives we go through experiences where we may feel dead, where we may feel like we need refreshing, some kind of new life, like we talked about last time. And so just seeing this water flowing through and bringing life is kind of like that rebirthing experience that we talked about before, getting new life. And as we keep looking, we're also going to see that, you know, there's something more to these fish as well. But at least in this passage, that's kind of what I see.
Yeah, I see the same thing, that it seems to also be a sign that life exists there. There's a sign that there's a source that is sustaining them. And so, yeah, let's dive in. There's passages in John that highlight verses that involve fish, and we're going to read through them and talk about them, see what they say. So the first one is from John 21, 3 to 7, and then also 12 to 13. And it says, Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. We'll come too, they all said. So they went out into the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, Fellows, have you caught any fish? No, they said. Then he said, Throw out your net on the right hand side of the boat, and then you'll get some. So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there was so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, It is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to the shore. Come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, Who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. Reading these passages, the fish seem to be a testament of faith. They've been like toiling all night and like nothing seems to work, and fish seem to be like avoiding their nets. And Jesus is like, Hey, how's it going? And then they're like, Yeah, not so good. He's like, Okay, well, just put your net on the other side. And then they're like, how's that gonna help? Like, like
Like,
fish
isn't that what
know.
we've been doing the whole night?
Yeah, like fish know what side the boat is on. Like, all right, sure, we'll do it, even though it doesn't sound like it'll help much. But when they listen to Jesus, all of this fish shows up. So it kind of makes me think, like, when we listen to Jesus, it seems like such a small thing to put the net on the other side. But when we listen to him, we allow him to work through that act of faith by listening to what he says.
Like that. It's so true because when I read this, I'm just like, man, it's like if I was in their place, it's like would I have actually followed through? I mean, hopefully, would like eventually do it, but I'm sure I would definitely just be like, should I? Or like we just said too, it's like we've been doing that all night basically. It's like why would it be different this time? But you're so right, just taking Jesus at his word. It's like, okay, you said it even though it doesn't make sense to me. And I feel like I've already kind of done that. It's like you said it, and if you say it, I have to trust that it's true and I have to follow. And I've definitely seen this true in my own life. I know I've definitely had experiences where, maybe I just had like a slight impression that maybe I should go talk to somebody or I should do a certain thing. And I'm like, it's just kind of like, why? I don't really understand this. Or, I might feel nervous to do it and I'm hesitant at first, but then whenever I've given in, it's always been amazing to see the way that God works. And I'm just like, wow, I had no idea. Just like one example, I was at the library one day studying and I saw a friend who um, I'd been wondering how she was doing and I hadn't seen her and I was wanting to talk to her but didn't really get around to. And I just kind of felt this like need to go talk to her and I didn't end up getting to at that moment. But then I saw when she left that she left something on the floor. And so at first I was like, it's like, well, she might have already left by now, but I should still try to go out and find her if I can. And I was just kind of praying and I was like, Lord, like, this feels really weird. I don't know, but I'm just gonna kind of do it. And so I went downstairs and I ended up seeing her and we got to talk and she was telling me about some difficult things she's been going through in her life. And I was just amazed to see how just kind of that little measure of faith, just following God's voice in my heart led to something that was a blessing for me, but also for my friend.
Hmm. Like did you hear like an audible voice?
No, I've never experienced that, but what I typically experience is just, yeah, again, kind of this like inner nudge, or maybe there's something that just continues to come to mind, where it's like I just can't quite shake it. It's just like this thought keeps coming up, like, oh, you should go talk to this person, or I might just be wondering about them, or might be feeling like I should do something, like maybe send a text to somebody, or go somewhere in particular. So yeah, it's just kind of more of this like quiet nudging on the inside. And people have different experiences. I don't know, how is it that you've experienced God relating to you or speaking to you?
Yeah, in a similar way, I'd say it's a lot of nudging. It's definitely just feel like kind of nudges, kind of like impressions that, kind of spring me up to action or compel me to do something. At the time that comes to mind is I was heading downstairs to do something. I was like in the middle of like working on something or studying, and I wanted to go downstairs to see like what my siblings were doing. And so as I was like halfway down the stairs, I kind of felt the expression like, don't do it, don't go down. Um, and I was like, oh, no, but curious to see, like what they're doing, and like, and a voice kind of like that, and like impression was just like, yeah, but if you do it, you're not gonna come back. Like, you're not gonna come back and do your work. You're gonna
Mm.
get distracted, and but I didn't listen. I still went anyways, and sure enough, I didn't finish what I planned to do that day, and I was like, man, I should have listened. I'm like,
Uh, so frustrating, those moments.
yeah. And so like, I mean, there's definitely some people that have heard like an audible voice from God where, they actually heard God speaking, as I'm hearing you speaking. But yeah, I feel like oftentimes when I know God speaking to me, it's not quite an audible voice per se, but it's like almost like it comes in my thoughts, but I know those thoughts are not my own.
Hmm.
And it's like a suggestion, I guess, kind of a nudge where you're like, huh, okay, yeah, I think I should do this. I should try this. Another quick example was recently, where I've just been so busy with things, and like kind of my devotional life hasn't been that great, and I remember just like I was like in the bathroom just doing my routine things, and then all of a sudden I kind of get this like, voice per se inside me where it's just like, when's the last time you've talked to me?
Mm.
And I was just like, oh, I'm so sorry, Lord. Like, you're right. It's been a while since I've actually spoken to you. It's been a while since I've actually heard you speak to me, because I haven't been listening. Yeah, I think
Mm.
it's definitely a still small voice where it's easy to miss if we're not listening for it.
Yeah. I like how you explained it before, saying it's almost kind of like that nudge is kind of like a suggestion in a sense. Obviously, God knows what's best and He wants us to do the right thing. But I think it, just goes to show how the free will, the freedom that God gives us. He's not going to force us to do anything, but He'll put certain things in your mind or in your heart of things that He would have you to do. And it's up to you to choose to follow that or not. And it is hard sometimes, when we do have those moments and you felt that nudge, but then you didn't follow. And it's like, oh, I should have done it. But at the times that you follow, it's just amazing. And it's like, wow, like God knew what I needed. He knew what, this other person needed, or, He had a plan and was wanting to use me in this way or just wanted to show me something. And so, yeah, I just think it's interesting that, again, it just kind of shows the way that God works with us, like His patience and His willingness to, yeah, let us make our own choices, and not force us to do anything in particular. And when we have those moments, when we feel that urge and that nudge, those are really like, that's like the essence of what faith is. You don't have any like tangible thing, like you can't show somebody later on and be like, oh, look, this is what God showed me. I mean, sometimes maybe you might have an experience like that, but most of the time that's not the case. And there's nothing really to show for this inward experience that you had, but or I know I've even questioned sometimes, it's like, oh, was that my thought or was that God? But then that's also an opportunity that I have to pray and ask God, like, I felt this way. I thought of this thing. Is that you or is that me? And oftentimes I've prayed, like, Lord, I think this is you. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like this is you showing me to go in this way. And, I'm going to walk in that way. And if for some reason that's not what you want for me, show me otherwise. But it's just interesting that, God gives us these opportunities to exercise our faith as He speaks to us, and we have the option or not whether to follow.
Yeah. I like how you brought up the point of times when it's like you're not sure if you're hearing his voice or not, or whether it's like our own thoughts. It takes time to fine tune hearing the voice of God. And I definitely don't claim to be any expert of hearing God's voice or anything, but it's just I just think about your friend, your really good friend. When you first met that friend, would you have been able to pick up their voice in a crowd? Probably
Probably not.
not. But if you've known them for a long time and in a crowd you heard them speaking, you probably could pick them out.
Mm.
It's the same thing with God's voice. It's a still small voice. I mean, sometimes he speaks louder when he needs to, but it takes time and persistent getting to know him to be able to recognize when he's speaking.
Yeah, and I think just going off of what you just said, it's all based on a relationship. And I think that's another beautiful thing about God. I know I always say that, but there's so many things about the way that God relates with us that I think are just amazing. And it's just really beautiful to me to think that, the God of the universe wants to be friends with us. Like he calls us his friends, he calls us his children. Like he really, really loves us and, just delights in us. And I think it's cool that, God doesn't ask us to have faith without giving us something to put our faith in or something of substance. And he's not just calling us to to follow what he says blindly, or just be like, oh, I'm God, listen to what I have to say. When we read his word, when we spend time with him, there's like an actual relationship. He's a real person and there's something of substance there. And so I think for me, I think that's very helpful in being able to exercise my faith. It's not just following a rule or a commandment or a random feeling that I have, but it's like these feelings are connected to a person that I have a relationship with. And so yeah, I just think that's really cool that that's kind of like at the core of the faith. And I think that also relates with our human relationships, going back to the example of a friend, maybe your friend asked you to do something, and maybe when you first met that person, if they'd asked you to do this thing, you might not have done it. But the more that you get to know them and you learn to trust them and see their character, maybe if they ask, like, I don't know, even just the example of like a trust fall. I don't know if you guys have done that before, but you just fall back into somebody's arms. You wouldn't just do that with a stranger. Like, you don't know them. You don't know if they're trustworthy, if they care about you, if, they would be willing to, I don't know, to help you up. But if you have a friend that you've come to know for a long time and you have a good relationship with them, there's that trust that's already there. So even though it's still a scary task to do, it's like, I know this person. And so I'm willing to, basically put my life in their hands, to surrender to them and put your faith in them that they will be there for you too.
Hmm. Yeah, and you brought up a good point. That relationship is so important here because if somebody who didn't really know was like, "Hey, could you do this list of things for me? I really appreciate it." Probably be less likely to be motivated than if somebody you really cared about was like, "Hey, I really need your help," or like, "Could you do these list of things for me?" You feel more likely to be motivated to do those things when you have a relationship with that person.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with God. The more we are drawn to him and we get to know him and fall in love with him, it would be a joy for us to follow him.
He definitely woos us into that relationship. And we're actually going to look at another set of verses in Luke chapter 24. And just to give a little bit of context, this is after Jesus died and rose from the dead. And this is shortly after that he meets a couple of men on a journey. And it's cool to see the way that he kind of explains who he is and kind of opens their eyes. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a cool story of faith. So we're going to go ahead and read this in Luke 24, first reading verses 35 to 36, and then 38 to 39. It says, Then the two men from Emmaus told their story of how Jesus had appeared to them as they were walking along the road, and how they had recognized him as he was breaking the bread. And just as they were telling about it, Jesus himself was suddenly standing there among them. Peace be with you, he said. Why are you frightened? He asked. Why are your hearts filled with doubt? As he spoke, he showed them his hands and his feet. Still they stood there in disbelief, filled with joy and wonder. Then he asked them, Do you have anything here to eat? They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it as they watched. Then he said, When I was with you before, I told you that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and then the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he opened their eyes to understand the scriptures. You are witnesses of all these things, and now I will send the Holy Spirit, just as my Father promised. But stay here in the city until the Holy Spirit comes and fills you with power from heaven. And so I just realized I read to verse 39. So it was 35 to 36 and then 38 to 49 if I said that incorrectly before. But just looking back at this story, it's just cool. You know, these guys are walking along the road and they're just talking about their experience with Jesus. Again, the relationship that they had with him. And then he actually shows up and he's like, you know, why are you doubtful? Why don't you have faith? Why are you sad? Or, you know, what makes you afraid? And then, you know, they continue on in their relationship with him and have to trust that, you know, this guy that showed up is Jesus, who they met and who they, you know, spent a lot of time with, and that he actually was who he said he was.
Mm. Yeah. And kind of paralleling to the verse in John, Jesus fed them fish and
Mm-hmm.
bread on the shore. And here, Jesus asked for something to eat, and they
Mm-hmm.
gave him broiled fish. And as he ate, then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. Earlier in that same passage in Luke, they kind of recounted the story when they were walking through Emmaus, and they didn't recognize Jesus until he broke the bread with them and opened their eyes to understand the scriptures. So it seems like initially, like it takes some time, you know, before we finally open our eyes to see God for who he is. Initially, we hear the invitation, we hear the call to come and get to know him. But it takes time for us to comprehend enough for us to be like, wow, he is God and he wants to hang out with me. What?
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think we both kind of explained this or mentioned this in our own testimonies and stuff that we, you know, we grew up in the church, but, you know, didn't really understand who God was until we really had a personal encounter. And yeah, it's interesting. Everybody's experience is different. There's some people that, you know, meet God early on, like have that personal, deep connection early on, and their eyes are open. But other people, you know, it might take longer for whatever reason, but it's cool that God, you know, is able to do that and, you know, wants to help us to understand who he is and wants us to really be able to understand and I guess be able to experience the fullness of that relationship with him. Like he really desires us to have this deep knowledge of him.
Yeah. And so if you're one of those people that have been like, oh, I've came to the Bible a million times, but I just can't, it just not sticking, nothing sticking. Or like I've sat in church, I've gone to different churches and it's just like not. That is tough.
Yeah.
And it happens. I sat in pews many times before my eyes were open.
Sure.
And I I would say my eyes were open when I really started seeking for myself. It takes persistence. There's a verse in Matthew 7, verse 7 to 11. Now, this is my mom's favorite passage. It says, keep on asking and you'll receive what you ask for.
Mm.
Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who seeks finds, and to everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. You parents, if your children ask for a loaf of bread, do you give them a stone instead? Or if they ask for a fish, do you give them a snake? Of course not. So if you sinful people know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him?
Mm.
So if you're struggling with that, if you've really been trying to, trying to find God, be honest with him and be like, look, Lord, I've done these things and I haven't found you yet. I want to find you. I want to yearn for you. He says that he will give us the fish. He will give us the faith. The doors will be open for us. He will give us
Mm.
the bread.
Oh, I really love that. I love how you said God will give us a fish and he will give us a bread. And it is true, it's like we sometimes in our experience, we feel like, man, I'm just having such a hard time understanding this or finding this thing. And it's like you're doing all that you can to find it. But I think you have to realize that at the end of the day, like obviously like we need to put forth like the effort that we can, but it's like ultimately God is the one that supplies these things, like having faith and everything, like those are gifts from God. It's not something that I think is part of us naturally, because again, we only see things the way that they are. We experience life in the way that we see it now. Our world is tangible, and there's just certain things, especially in the scriptures. I think that's why it was so confusing for, the people of Jesus' time or even people before to understand certain spiritual concepts, because it's not stuff that we can always see or that's readily understandable, because it's so different from our world. It's outside of our world. It's in the spiritual realm. And so, God is the only one that can really can give us the ability to truly trust him and everything. And so, yeah, it's just very interesting that it's like this thing that he's asking us to have, he has to supply it. But I think that just goes to show that it's like we have to come to him to get it. And you might be saying like, I have asked God, many times I have, knocked per se at the door seeking. And I know it can be so frustrating, and I think that's probably one of the hardest things to go through, like Audra was mentioning, because you're doing all these things but you feel like you're not quite getting there. And I know I've definitely also had times where I was studying my Bible or trying to learn more about God, and I just felt like I wasn't really getting it, or maybe I'm unfocused or something else when I'm trying to read, and it's like I'm just not really receptive like I want to be. But something that's helped me has been to remember that any time that you spend in God's presence, I think, is definitely time well spent. You might not feel like you've received something, like you might not walk away with an aha moment or something, or feel like, wow, like I really understand God better now. But I feel like, the growth over time, the fact that you spent that time with him and you dedicated your time to get to know him, it might not make sense at that moment, but over time, it definitely will lead up to something. And yeah, we don't always understand the way that God works, but I think he opens our eyes at the time that he knows that we're ready for it, and will help us in that journey and is with us whether or not we may feel that or not.
Yeah, this doesn't just apply to like reading your Bible or like trying to find God, but even with those that have had faith for a long time, there are times when things we ask for, or things that we desire, or things that we might have like a mountain in front of us, and it's like, Lord, I don't know how you're going to move this mountain because it's just not. Or we're like stuck in a hole, and it's like, I have doubts that this is going to work. Or if God is like, I want you to do this thing, and you're like, I don't know, it doesn't look feasible right now. The times when we feel a lacking of faith, this verse is for you. Definitely, I have, I need this verse many times. He's like, I will give you what is good. Keep on asking, keep on knocking, keep on seeking. Jesus has kept on knocking, kept on asking, kept on seeking us
Mm.
in the times when we have been sleeping. And literally in our lives, Jesus has been slept on, you know. I love this quote that an author who has written many amazing books, her name is Ellen White, in her book, Christian Experience and Teaching. I definitely encourage that you take advantage of her writings. But she wrote this quote that I thought was so timely for this message. It says, the very time to exercise faith is when we feel destitute of the Spirit.
Mm.
The times when we feel like our efforts are futile, the times that we feel like this is not looking good, times when we feel really like we're at the bottom, of our faith journey, those are the very times where we need to exercise our faith. The times when we feel destitute, empty of the Spirit of God.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of like I feel like when you reach those moments, those like rock bottom moments, it's like, yeah, I feel like you come to this point where it's like you realize that there is nothing left that you can do. And I feel like you're almost kind of emptied of yourself, if that makes sense. Where, yeah, it's like I've given all that I have, like there's kind of nothing left in me to give. And I feel like those are the times when God can really come into us. And not that He doesn't at other times or that He doesn't want to at other times, but I feel like, especially at those moments, it feels like really special opportunities when God can reveal Himself to us in a special way. And I also really like what you said about, Jesus also knocking at the door. And we've looked at that passage or looked at the passage in Revelation 3, talking about how Jesus stands at the door and knocks and, wants us to open, and He wants to come in and have a feast with us. And I just think that's really cool that, it's like as we're instructed in the Bible to ask and to seek and to knock, that Jesus is doing the same thing for us. Just as we want our eyes to be open to Him, He wants our eyes to be open so that we can understand who He is, and He can, fully come in and dine with us and enjoy the fullness of a relationship with us. So I think it's kind of cool that it's like you have this like knocking, this seeking, this pursuing on both sides. And yeah, it's just really beautiful thinking of the way that, God constantly comes after us, and He doesn't get tired of like standing at that door and knocking, even though, we get tired and we're like, oh, I'm so tired of doing this. I've been doing this for so long. I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. And, imagine Him doing that with all of us and having to be so patient, but He's so kind, so patient with us. And yeah, I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, patience is so key. Yeah, there's another story that talks about Jesus giving someone something. And it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And it's from John chapter 4. I'll go ahead and read verses 6 to 7, 10, and 13 to 15. It says, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from a long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw the water, and Jesus said to her, Please give me a drink. Jesus replied, If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me if I would give you living water. Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again, but those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It will become a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Please, sir, the woman said, please give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water.
I can continue reading verses 25 to 26, and then 28 to 30, and then lastly, verse 42. So it says, The woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When He comes, He will explain everything to us. Then Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could He possibly be the Messiah? So the people came streaming from the village to see Him. Then they said to the woman, Now we believe, not just because of what you told us, but because we have heard Him ourselves. Now we know that He is indeed the Savior of the world.
It's very interesting that Jesus asked her for a drink first.
Yeah.
And then after that, we didn't read those verses here, but He explains to her her life situation pretty much. And she's been through a lot. She has been with different men, different husbands, and the man that she is currently with right now, as she's speaking to Jesus, was not her husband. And she came out to this well at noontime, and that was the time when nobody shows up, that it's too hot, usually they come earlier in the day. So she went at a time when nobody's there, because you know how people be gossiping about stuff. And so she meets Jesus there, and let alone he's a man who's not a Samaritan. She's a Samaritan, and Jews and Samaritans don't mix at that time. And he's speaking to her, and she's like, who's this crazy man trying to talk to me? And yet he treats her with respect and grace and love. And he, is like, hey, like, I know your situation, but let me tell you, the water that you thirst for, I have it. All you have to do is ask me and I'll give it to you. He asked her for a drink first though, which I thought that was interesting. What do you think about that, Lauren?
I mean, I guess just something that comes to mind now is just, there's so many things that we need from God, but it's kind of like I'm like pursuing her where it's like, you also have something to give me. Like, I want you. So yeah, I kind of feel like it's almost like this like invitation for her to come on to him where it's like there's something that you have that I also want. I want a relationship with you. And I think too, just kind of realizing for him, yeah, I guess the need that he had was for her to, see that she also needed him.
Yeah, there's this play on thirst. So he has been on this journey, walk for a long time, and stopped by this well. And he knew he had to go there because earlier in the story he's like, I need to take this detour down this path. So he intentionally showed up at this place and he asked her for water. And what that said to me was like, she had to realize that there's something deeper he's getting at here.
Yeah.
She realized her brokenness. It was like, give me your water, because the water I give you, it's everlasting.
Hmm.
Give me your burdens, because the burden I give you is light.
That's so cool. I don't know why I never realized it until you just said it. It's like kind of like an exchange. We mentioned, I think it was like in the first episode of the podcast about with the invitation, Jesus wanting to give us his load that's light. And so, yeah, it's kind of like this like exchange, like give me that which is broken, that which is defective, and it will give you something better. That's actually really cool. I never really saw it like that as an exchange, but I really like the way you explained
Me neither.
that.
That's how
See,
the
always
spirit
learning new
works.
things.
Yeah. And so there's that exchange where he's like, hey, I know that your life has taken some turns that you didn't want to. And I know why you came this time. Like, she was ashamed. She didn't want to deal with the gossip. She didn't want to deal with the church folk that were, saying all sorts of things about her lifestyle. But Jesus was like, I get it.
Yeah.
Give that to me. Give me that hurt. Give me that. And I will give you more than you came here for. Way more than you came here for. She came to the well for water. And he was just like, I will multiply that in your life where you don't have to thirst for anything else anymore. We don't know exactly her situation. It was hard to be a woman at that time.
Yeah.
And they're pretty much considered property. And so, using her story as a metaphor, there might be areas in our life that we're thirsting after things. Could be relationships, could be a girlfriend, could be a boyfriend, could be a husband, could be a wife, it could be substances, it could be material things, it could be things that are we try to acquire to fill up some kind of void, to
Hmm.
make us feel more full or more satisfied with life. But we realize that the more we acquire those things, the more that we realize that it's meaningless, that we're still empty inside. But Jesus is like, come to me and I will satisfy you to the point where you are not thirsting for things to satisfy you, because I will satisfy you. My portion that I give you is enough. And not
Hmm.
only enough, it's more than enough, because you'll be like overflowing with bubbling fountain of all of these things.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that that's such a good point. It's really interesting because it's like she had to have faith that Jesus was who he said he was. But I think also faith that there was something better than what she was currently going through. I mean, I'm sure we've all been in situations where maybe there's certain aspects of what we're doing that we enjoy, but then there's other aspects that are, really hard to deal with, and we just realize that, maybe the way that we're living really isn't the best, or that there's things that are problematic about it, but we don't always know what a better solution is, or we might feel like this is just kind of where I'm at and this is what my life will look like, or this is how I've always lived, so this, why should I try to change it? But I think it's interesting that she kind of also has to have faith that there's something better and that Jesus really can supply that. And basically that Jesus is enough, because he's saying, I basically have everything that you need and more. And so she had to have faith in that. And I think it's cool that, she was able to have that faith. And I think it's beautiful that, God meets us where we're at. Jesus related to her in a way that made sense for her. He, told her the things that she had done, in a kind and loving way, just letting her know that, I understand your story. I understand what you've been through. I understand, what other people know about you and might judge you for, but I'm here to show you that I'm not going to judge you, but I just want to love you and I want to give you something more than you're experiencing currently. And she took him up on that. And I think us seeing the love of God for us helps us to have that faith. Not to say again that, it's not a difficult journey and that it doesn't require a lot of, prayer and asking God over and over again, like, Lord, help me, because I really just don't have it in me to have this faith. And it's not perfect every time, but I think the more that we come to know God and the more that we see his love for us, the more that we can put our faith in him, because again, it goes back to that relationship and knowing his character, that this person that asks us to surrender to him is asking it because he has our best intentions at heart. And not only did this woman, have faith in God or Jesus for herself, but she also went and told other people about her experience. And I love, the people's response. They said, now we believe not just because of what you told us, but because we have heard him for ourselves. Yeah, I love that they had faith in what she said, but then they also went back themselves to check for themselves and be like, okay, who is this guy that she's talking about? And, is he really trustworthy as she says he is? So I think that that's also a thing that's important, that it's like, yeah, just coming to God for ourselves. We can definitely, trust the things that our friends and family members or maybe our pastors might tell us, but ultimately we have to have a personal encounter with God ourselves. And I love this. I can't remember where the verse is, but there's a verse that says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." And yeah, it's that personal experience that makes it real, and that's where faith really comes in.
Mm, yeah. And the faith is so tied with the water, right? And fish and bread. And so in John 7 kind of highlights like what the water signifies. And we kind of touched on it, but here are the verses that really define for us. So John 7:14, and then I'll read John 7:37 to 39 as well. It says, then midway through the festival, Jesus went up to the temple and began to teach. On the last day, the climax of the festival, Jesus stood and shouted to the crowds, anyone who is thirsty may come to me. Anyone who believes in me may come and drink. For the scriptures declare, rivers of living water will flow from his heart. When he said living water, he was speaking of the Spirit, who would be given to everyone believing in him. But the Spirit had not yet been given because Jesus has not yet entered into his glory. So Jesus met this Samaritan woman at the well, and she was thirsty. She was actually the one that was thirsty and had the shame of her situation. And here we have Jesus who's teaching from the temple, and here, which is kind of like again similar to that temple in Ezekiel 47. Jesus is speaking from the temple. His words are coming out as water is flowing out. And he's now talking about this water now. He says, anyone who believes in me may come and drink. So he's saying, come and drink. Anyone who believes in me, come and drink. Like the woman at the well, come and drink
Mm.
from me, from my waters, from this temple. When you drink from my waters, from my temple, you'll have living water that will fill and flow from your heart. And then he said, this living water is his spirit. The water is his spirit. The words that he speaks, as we mentioned before, is the bread. And now we have fish flowing in the water as a testament of our faith. They all go together.
Mm. So nice. I love how you wrap that all up. Just to again highlight God's faithfulness. So God asks us to have faith in him and helps us to be able to take him at his word and to come to the water and partake of his spirit. And his spirit is the one that helps us to be able to have this faith and exercise it. But God is also faithful to us too. And I love that about God, that we never have to doubt him. We never have to doubt his word. That love that flows from the temple is something that continues to flow, and we never have to fear it stopping or the water running out, because God is love and it just flows from him. It's just who he is. And so I want to read a passage from Nehemiah 9 verses 15 to 17 that talk about God's faithfulness. It says, you gave them bread from heaven when they were hungry and water from the rock when they were thirsty. You commanded them to go and take possession of the land you had sworn to give them. But our ancestors were proud and stubborn, and they paid no attention to your commands. They refused to obey and did not remember the miracles you had done for them. Instead, they became stubborn and appointed a leader to take them back to their slavery in Egypt. But you are a God of forgiveness, gracious and merciful, slow to become angry, and rich in unfailing love. You did not abandon them. And actually, to continue this verse, I'll keep reading. But in your great mercy, you did not abandon them to die in the wilderness. The pillar of cloud still led them forward by day, and the pillar of fire showed them the way through the night. You sent your good spirit to instruct them, and you did not stop giving them manna from heaven or water for their thirst. For 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell.
That's so beautiful. I love those passages because it just talks about how like they had this rebellion in the beginning. And even with their unfaithfulness, God remained faithful through that and provided them all they need. He kind of talks about water from a rock at the beginning of this. And I'm probably wondering like what does that mean? So there's a story that happened and they're wandering the wilderness, and Moses, who was their leader at the time, was kind of like their leader and like in a sense prophet, where he proclaimed God messages for them. So they were thirsty, and they were like, are we just gonna be out here and die? Like, why did we leave our place where there was like all of this food and all of this stuff? And so he prayed to God for water, and he ended up, so God instructed him to speak to a rock, and when he does that, water will come from the rock. And so he ends up striking the rock. And long story short, water did end up coming from the rock. And that rock is signifying Jesus. He is often compared to as the rock of ages or the cornerstone. And so here again, we have this comparison between the temple, Jesus, and now a rock. And so when this rock was supposed to be spoken to, water flowed from that rock. Same as how the temple flowed from that rock. And this is the water that sustained their life at that time. And they were able to drink from it and be filled. And I like how it said that even though It says, but in his great mercy, God did not abandon them at all to die in the wilderness. He sustained everything they need, from the food they ate, the water they drank, to the shoes that they were and the clothes that they were wearing. Like, they lacked nothing. They were completely satisfied, completely filled,
Completely covered.
completely covered. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, like, there's that Psalm 23 we read before, like, the Lord is our shepherd, I have all I need. When God is our shepherd, we are satisfied, we have all we need.
Yeah. A whole meal. He's got it all.
Whole
It's just
meal.
so pretty. Like literally everything that they were wondering about, God had it in store for them. And yeah, I just think it's amazing God's faithfulness to us because, sometimes I look at myself and I'm just like, man, I'm like, if I was God, I would not, I don't even know how I deal with myself. I can barely deal with myself sometimes. So to
Yeah.
think that God of the universe deals with me as well as, millions of other people that are like me, that are unfaithful and, stubborn like the Israelites and complaining and stuff. It's just amazing that God is able to be faithful to us, but he does it out of such love in his heart. And there's this really, really beautiful verse that I love in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. It says, if we are unfaithful, he, meaning God, remains faithful, for he cannot deny who he is. And I just love that verse because it's basically saying that, like, if God were to be unfaithful to us, that would be contradicting like his whole nature, like his whole character. Like being faithful is part of who he is. It's just who he is. And it's beautiful that he wants to pour that out on us so lavishly and so undeservingly because we definitely, definitely do not deserve it.
We don't. And I love how it says he is faithful even when we're not.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of God we serve. He doesn't like divorce us as soon as we mess up, like he's
Praise God.
not done with us, but rather he sticks with us, and he's like, my faithfulness will never fail. My love for you will never fail. We
Yeah.
fail all the time, but he is constant, not changing. He's always going to be long suffering for us. He's always going to be full of grace and mercy. So what's our response to that? That does it mean that we're always going to be unfaithful? Does it mean we're always going to have to fall all the time, always going to have to fail at everything? No. He promises us to be victorious. He promises us to become overcomers of those that strip us down, that weigh us down. There's this text in Hebrews that is one of my favorites. Hebrews chapter 12, 1-3. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates, who opens our eyes, and our faith, perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated on the place of honor beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and give up.
Mhm. Yeah, that is just so beautiful. I love how it says that Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith, or the initiator and perfecter of our faith. Like we've been talking about it, it's God that gives us the ability to have faith in him to begin with, even though it's something that, you know, we're asked, I guess, to do, to believe. It really is a gift. And yeah, just being able to strip away all these things that keep us from that. And again, that's not something that we can do ourselves. Like God is the one that helps to, like we mentioned before with the water, helps to cleanse us, helps to wash us of all of these things that are those weights that hold us back so that we can move forward. And I think this is also a really great reminder, going along with what we talked about before, that Jesus, because he is a perfecter of our faith, if we do mess up, if we feel like God is speaking to us, or maybe we're not really sure if he's speaking to us and we feel like we made the wrong decision later on. And, it's so easy to just be like, oh, why did I do that? Or like, how did I not know? But I think that God wants us to know that we don't have to do that to ourselves. Like, we don't have to like beat ourselves up and be frustrated, but know that he is the one that will perfect our faith. Like, we're not going to do it right all the time. We're not always going to have perfect faith. If, we could have that, but we're not always going to have the faith that we wish we had exercised. But Jesus is the perfecter of that and will help us. And, just showing his love again for us, it said that because of the joy that awaited him, he endured the cross. Like, that's insane. Like, being crucified on a cross, like, he looked forward to us, like, showing his love to us being redeemed as his joy to get him through that. Like, that's insane. I mean, again, just knowing the kind of people that we are, that was joyful for him, and that actually gave him strength to endure the cross. It's just amazing. And I think that he will also give us that strength, to be able to endure whatever challenges we face, and again, to have the faith that we need to get through it. Jesus said once too that, um, he said that I have overcome the world. Like, basically, don't be afraid because I have done it before you. And I think that, for me at least, is a very great comfort in knowing that, yeah, my God, Jesus has gone before me. He has overcome the world. He's overcome all of the challenges that I may ever face. And he faced them with faith and with strength and power by the Spirit. And I can do the same thing as I allow him to work in me.
Exactly. And there's times in our faith walk where we don't always see the result or the end point, or it looks like we're walking through a dark tunnel and we don't really see the light at the end of it. But all we have is God's promises in those moments. All we have is his words that he spoke to us before, and like, we don't see it right away. And those are the moments, like in that quote mentioned before, that we are given the opportunity to exercise our faith. And so what is faith? Like, there's this text in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, which pretty much sums it up in one sentence, saying that faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see.
Yeah.
So it's like relying on those promises, especially in times when we don't always see the immediate result of it. And it is the reality of what we hope for, because we trust that he is faithful. We trust that he will fulfill the promises that he has said, even in times when we don't see it all the time. We believe that he will keep his end of the stick, because he always does.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too, in that same chapter in Hebrews 11, is often called the faith chapter because it talks about all of these people that had great faith. And it's interesting, as you read through there, you see names of people like David and Abraham and all these people that, obviously, were great people in the Bible, but also have stories where they definitely did not have faith in God. And I think it's beautiful that, God included them in that. I think as a witness to us that it's like, yes, like, again, you don't always have the faith that you wish that you had, but I still, count you as righteous, basically, as you trust in me. And so, yeah, it's just kind of that reminder that it's like God still is pleased with us, as we're exercising our faith and as he's helping us to grow in that.
Mm. Yeah. And so we encourage you to think about what the faith journey looks like for you. Are there areas in your life where you have found yourself doubting God's providence, or if there's areas that feel like deserts? What are ways in which you can exercise your faith in those moments?
Yeah,
But,
no, those are really good things to think of. And again, these are things that are helpful for us to think of because I feel like it's something that you should, evaluate often because it's easy to kind of get caught up in things and forget, some of these pillars of our faith. And so as we finish up, we just want to again go back to our anchor text again, just to look at Ezekiel 47. And, hopefully every time that we go through, these lessons and go back to it at the end, hopefully you're able to see something new in it as we've talked about it. So we'll go ahead and start reading that again from verse 1. In my vision, the man brought me back to the entrance of the temple. There I saw a stream flowing east from beneath the door of the temple and passing to the right of the altar on its south side. Measuring as he went, he took me along the stream for 1,750 feet, and then led me across. The water was up to my ankles. He measured off another 1,750 feet and led me across again. This time the water was up to my knees. After another 1,750 feet, it was up to my waist. Then he measured another 1,750 feet, and the river was too deep to walk across. It was deep enough to swim in, but too deep to walk through.
He asked me, "Have you been watching, Son of Man?" Then he led me back along the river bank. When I returned, I was surprised by the sight of many trees growing on both sides of the river. Then he said to me, "This river flows east through the desert into the valley of the Dead Sea. The waters of this stream will make the salty waters of the Dead Sea fresh and pure."
There will be swarms of living things wherever the water of this river flows. Fish will abound in the Dead Sea, for its waters will become fresh. Life will flourish wherever this water flows. Fishermen will stand along the shores of the Dead Sea, all the way from En-Gedi to Eneglaim. The shores will be covered with nets drying in the sun. Fish of every kind will fill the Dead Sea, just as they fill the Mediterranean. So again, just to kind of summarize, we just really hope for you guys that, as this water is flowing from the temple, Jesus' love, his spirit flowing from the temple, which represents himself, that we, like the fish in these verses, will be able to have new life and will be able to have abundance as we live a life of faith, as God gives us the help that we need to trust in him and his word, to trust that he will help us to live a new life in him. And so, yeah, thank you for going with us on this journey, looking at faith and seeing how that's exemplified by fish. Our next topic will be looking at fruit and what there is to see with that in scripture. What is the significance of it? What is the importance of it in our lives?
Questions to ponder this week is, how has God's faithfulness shown up in your life, and what has that looked like? Second question, what does it look like for me to exercise my faith in those moments when I feel like I'm lacking faith? Thank you for coming. If you like what you just heard, we encourage you to stay up to date with our latest information and follow us on our Instagram page and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And if you have any questions, feel free to leave your comments and questions on our social media platforms. We would love to stay in touch with you, answer any questions that you might have, and offer whatever support we can.